There's a certain kind of person who can never bring themselves to refuse. You ask them for a favor, and they say yes. You ask them to stay a little longer, and they say yes. You ask them for more than they can give, and somehow they still say yes. Not because they want to, not because they have the time, or the energy, or the emotional space, but because the word no feels like betrayal, not of you, but of themselves. People who can't say no aren't weak. They're not pushovers. They're not clueless. In fact, they're often the strongest, most compassionate, most self-aware people you'll ever meet. But they carry a kind of invisible fear that runs deeper than logic. The fear of disappointing others. And that fear, once it takes root, becomes a lifelong habit. It's not that they don't know how to refuse. It's that the idea of letting someone down feels unbearable. The thought of being seen as difficult or unhelpful makes their stomach twist. Their mind instantly jumps to the worst-case scenarios. What if you get upset? What if you think they're selfish? What if you leave? So before the fear even finishes forming, they say yes. People who can't say no often grew up in environments where love felt conditional, where approval had to be earned, where their worth was tied to their usefulness, where the safest option was to make everyone else comfortable even if it hurt them. So now, as adults, the reflex remains. Saying yes feels like survival. Saying no feels like danger. And the world notices. Because the world always notices the givers. They become the friend everyone relies on. The co-worker who covers every shift. The partner who forgives everything. The one who shows up even when they're exhausted, broken, overwhelmed, or drowning. People call them angels, helpers, lifesavers, so selfless. But no one realizes that behind every yes is a person who's quietly burning out. They smile, they nod, they agree, they help. And while everyone else breathes easier, their own chest tightens a little more each day. Because deep down, they know the truth. Every yes to someone else is often a no to themselves. But they can't stop. Their mind won't let them. There's a voice inside them that whispers, if you say no, they'll be disappointed. If you say no, they'll be hurt. If you say no, you'll lose them. If you say no, you'll become a burden instead of a blessing. So they keep saying yes even when they're tired, even when they're overwhelmed, even when they feel their energy thinning like fragile glass. They've mastered the art of stretching themselves a little thinner every day, until they barely recognize their own boundaries. People who can't say no often look calm on the surface, collected, friendly, agreeable. But inside, they carry a quiet pressure that never fully leaves. They wake up thinking about what others need. They fall asleep wondering if they did enough. They replay conversations, checking for signs they disappointed someone. Their mind becomes a constant loop of I hope they're not mad at me. I hope I didn't say the wrong thing. I hope I didn't let anyone down. And yet most people never suspect a thing. Because the ones who can't say no are often the ones who smile the most. They hide their exhaustion behind kindness. They hide their anxiety behind helpfulness. They hide their fear behind perfection. They hide their people-pleasing behind it's no trouble, really. But it is trouble. It is heavy. And the longer they carry it, the more it costs them. And one day, they wake up and realize they've spent their entire lives taking care of everyone else, except themselves. People who can't say no often live with a paradox. They are incredibly generous with others and painfully stingy with themselves. They give away their time, their energy, their patience, their care. But when it comes to their own needs, they shrink. It's not that they don't have needs. It's that somewhere along the way, they learn their needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. Maybe they grew up in a home where saying no wasn't allowed, where defiance meant punishment, where boundaries were met with anger, where being good meant being obedient, quiet, useful. Or maybe they had parents who were volatile. One wrong word could start a storm, so they learned to keep the peace at any cost. Or maybe they were raised by people who needed emotional caretaking, so they grew up far too young, learning to manage other people's moods before they even understood their own. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. They become adults who believe that harmony is their responsibility. They become emotional firefighters, always on call, always ready to extinguish someone else's flames, even if they're burning inside themselves. And here's the heartbreaking part. Most of the time, no one sees their sacrifice, because they make it look effortless. The world mistakes their compliance for comfort, their politeness for genuine willingness, their silence for agreement, but inside, there's a quiet war happening. Every time they say yes, a small part of them whispers, "You didn't want this. Why didn't you speak up?" And another part whispers back, "Because it's easier this way. Because conflict hurts. Because their feelings matter more." People who can't say no become professionals at suppressing themselves. They become experts at hiding discomfort. They nod even when their mind is screaming. They agree even when their heart is heavy. They smile even when they're resentful, exhausted, stretched thin. Psychologists call this fawning, a trauma response where a person avoids conflict and ensures safety by pleasing others. It's not kindness. It's self-protection. But it doesn't feel like protection. It feels like guilt. Because people who can't say no carry two burdens. The burden of always being available and the burden of believing they're selfish if they're not. So when they try to set boundaries, even tiny ones, their body reacts like they're doing something wrong. Their heart races. Their palms sweat. Their voice trembles. Sometimes they even apologize before setting the boundary. "I'm sorry, but I'm actually really tired. I'm sorry. I don't think I can. I'm sorry. I know it's inconvenient. I'm sorry. I wish I could help." A boundary shouldn't require an apology, but for them, it feels like a sin. And the people around them, the ones who are used to their endless agreement, rarely understand the fear beneath it. Because the truth is, people who can't say no don't avoid the word out of politeness. They avoid it because they associate it with rejection, conflict, abandonment, disappointment. They're not afraid of the word. They're afraid of the reaction. They imagine worst-case scenarios in vivid detail. Arguments, coldness, being misunderstood, being disliked, being seen as selfish or unkind, losing the relationship. For someone else, no is just a word. For them, no is a risk. And because of that, their emotional currency becomes overdrawn. They invest in people who never invest back. They help those who wouldn't do the same. They stretch themselves for people who don't even notice the stretch. But even though they feel the exhaustion building, they keep going. Because saying yes feels safer than the alternative, even if it slowly destroys them. There's a moment quiet, subtle, almost invisible, when someone who can't say no realizes they're being taken for granted. It doesn't come with anger. It comes with a quiet sinking in the chest, a gentle collapsing inside the ribs. It happens when they agree to something they didn't want to do, and the other person accepts it without hesitation. No gratitude, no awareness, just expectation. That's when the truth hits. People aren't appreciating them, people are depending on them. And dependence is a heavy chain. People who can't say no often become the reliable one, the strong one, the always there for everyone one. It sounds flattering, but it's not. Because the moment you become the strong one, you lose the right to feel weak. Others forget that strength is not your natural state, it's your performance. And performances are exhausting. They're the friend who always shows up at 3 a.m. They're the co-worker who takes on the extra shift. They're the sibling who never asks for help but gives endlessly. They're the partner who sacrifices quietly to avoid tension. But here's the hidden truth. The more reliable they are, the more invisible their pain becomes. People rarely check on those who never say no, and so their hurt grows silently, like a plant kept in the dark, twisting, reaching, starving for light. Psychologists note that people who can't say no often carry internalized responsibility. They believe they're accountable for other people's comfort, emotions, and outcomes. That if something goes wrong, it's somehow their fault because they should have done more. So they overcompensate. They overgive. They overwrite their own boundaries in permanent ink and let others redraw them at will. And the cost? Resentment. Not loud resentment. Not the kind that explodes, but the quiet kind. A slow dripping resentment that wears away the inside, like water eroding stone. They start feeling drained around people they once cared for. Not because they don't love them, but because they're tired of carrying more than their share. They start avoiding plans. Not because they're antisocial, but because every plan feels like another potential obligation. They start fantasizing about disappearing. Not dramatically, just quietly slipping away from the expectations that choke them. You'll notice these people often say things like, "Don't worry about me. I'm fine. I can handle it. It's no big deal." But that's not humility. It's emotional self-erasure. Deep down, they crave something simple. To be cared for the way they care for others. To be chosen without asking. To be supported without earning it. To be allowed to say, "I need help," without fear. But they never give themselves that permission. Because somewhere inside, a voice repeats the same script. Your worth comes from what you do for others. Your needs make you a burden. Disappointing people is dangerous. Being liked is safer than being honest. Saying no will cost you love. These beliefs aren't rational. They're emotional scars disguised as personality traits. And that's the tragedy. People think they're naturally helpful, naturally agreeable, naturally easygoing. But these traits aren't natural, they're survival mechanisms. Learned young, reinforced often, rarely questioned until adulthood. And by then, the habit is so deeply ingrained that breaking it feels like breaking a part of themselves. But what they don't realize is this: they're not breaking anything. They're finally letting something heal. People who can't say no often live in a world built from unspoken rules. Rules they never agreed to, yet feel obligated to follow. Rules like, you must be easy to love. You must not create conflict. You must stay agreeable. You must not disappoint anyone. And the most destructive one, you must earn your place in people's lives. So they give. They stretch. They bend. They endure. Not because they want to, but because they believe that love is conditional, and the conditions are never in their favor. You'll notice how they hesitate before answering anything. How they give a small smile before agreeing. How they swallow their true feelings like bitter medicine. It's not indecisiveness. It's fear. Fear that honesty will cost them connection. Fear that boundaries will push people away. Fear that saying no will reveal how fragile they truly feel inside. But the irony is brutal. Saying yes all the time doesn't make people love them more. It only makes people expect more from them. And when expectations rise, their sense of self-worth falls. They start losing pieces of themselves in tiny, invisible ways. They stop sharing their opinions if they might offend someone. They stop making choices that benefit them. They stop pursuing things they want because someone else's desire feels more urgent. They stop taking space physically, emotionally, mentally. Instead, they shrink into the version of themselves that is easiest for others to handle. But here's the twist. Despite their fear of saying no, these people are often incredibly perceptive. They sense emotional shifts long before others notice them. They feel the tension behind people's words. They hear the disappointment in someone's exhale. They pick up on guilt, irritation, desire, sadness, all without being told. Because when you spend your life trying not to upset anyone, you become an expert at reading the room. Hyper-awareness becomes their shield. Self-abandonment becomes their armor. And so they move through life constantly adjusting, softening themselves, shaping themselves, contorting themselves to fit the emotional needs of everyone around them. It's a painful intelligence, but beneath that hyper-awareness, beneath the careful politeness, beneath the constant yes, there is exhaustion, a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that feels older than their body, the kind that makes them sigh before falling asleep, not because they're tired, but because they're tired of being tired. They dream of simple things, a life where they don't have to explain themselves, a love that doesn't need to be earned, friendships where no is respected, not resented, a world where their needs matter, not just their usefulness. But most of all, they dream of relief. The relief of being honest. The relief of being seen. The relief of being someone who can finally say, "This is too much for me," without drowning in guilt. And here's the most heartbreaking part. People who can't say no are often the ones who need support the most yet ask for it the least. They suffer quietly. They carry silently. They break invisibly, because their entire identity was built on one fragile foundation. Don't upset anyone, but no one can live that way forever. At some point, the weight becomes too heavy, the yes becomes too painful, the mask becomes too tight, and that's when the healing begins. Healing begins quietly, not with a dramatic confrontation, not with anger, not with a sudden transformation, but with a single uncomfortable moment where they whisper a word they feared their entire life: no. And the world doesn't end. No one leaves. No one explodes. No one hates them. The silence after that first no feels strange, like stepping into a room where the air is finally breathable, because for the first time ever, they chose themselves. At first, boundaries feel unnatural, like wearing clothes that don't quite fit yet. Saying no feels rude. Taking space feels selfish. Rest feels undeserved. But healing isn't comfortable. It's correct. People who can't say no often begin healing when they realize that constantly saying yes has cost them more than it ever gave. They notice how drained they feel after every forced agreement, how resentment builds beneath their smile, how they apologize for things that aren't their fault, how they shrink when they should stand tall, and slowly, very slowly, they begin to reconnect with the parts of themselves they abandoned to please others. They rediscover preferences. They rediscover opinions. They rediscover emotions they buried so deeply they forgot they were allowed to feel them. They start to understand something profound. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors. And doors don't exist to shut people out. They exist to let the right people in. People who can't say no often fear boundaries because they think boundaries will drive others away. But in reality, boundaries reveal the truth: who values them, and who only valued what they provided. Some relationships fade, some shift, some deepen, some collapse. And although losing people hurts, losing yourself hurts more. So they learn to tolerate discomfort. They learn to express needs without apologizing for them. They learn that someone else's disappointment is not their responsibility to fix. They learn that being loved is not something you earn by sacrificing your peace. It's something you deserve simply because you exist. And as this realization grows, their yes becomes meaningful again, no longer a reflex, no longer an obligation, no longer a desperate attempt to avoid rejection. Their yes becomes a choice, a real one, a healthy one. And a yes with boundaries is infinitely more valuable than 1,000 yeses born from fear. The real transformation happens when they finally understand. They were never weak for wanting to keep the peace. They were never soft for caring too much. They were never flawed for fearing conflict. They were surviving. They were adapting. They were trying to stay loved in the only way they knew how. But now, they're learning a new way. A kinder way. A braver way. A way where they take up space without shrinking, where they speak without trembling, where they choose themselves without guilt. And in that new life, they don't stop caring for others, they simply stop abandoning themselves in the process, because they finally understand what they should have known all along. Saying no doesn't make you unlovable, it makes you real. And real people deserve real love.